mapped out for us our career plan, our sort of career progress. So you finish school, you get your A-levels, go to university, join an organisation, work your way up through middle management, maybe have a few nice holidays, then retire and die. I think that was the gist that it was coming across to me, and this was horrific. I felt a sense of just terrible dread actually in this, and a sense that there must be something more than just birth, work, death, which was the sort of paradigm that was being offered to me as a 13 or 14-year-old. So there was this initial shock, there was this initial disillusionment, but it was compounded further by the fact that I looked around the class and everyone else was sort of busying themselves away. They were loving this idea of sort of mapping out their careers. And I even spoke to them afterwards, and they just didn't have a clue what I was talking about. They had no idea that, well, they just couldn't relate to the sense that it was, they were just kind of train tracks going off in a very prescribed line for their futures. This disillusioned me further. And I'd speak to other people, particularly older people, and they'd say, "Oh, don't worry, it's just a phase. You'll grow out of it." I thought, that's even worse. The idea that I've seen this kind of process is operating, but then I'm going to become blinded to it and just jaded and kind of go along with it. It's just horrible. This sort of meaninglessness of secular life just hit me. I don't know, maybe it's just me. Maybe there are people here who've experienced that, at least to some degree. I don't know whether you've had comparable experiences. But I mean, one of the things that I found fairly soon after I started talking to other people who meditated was that this was not a unique experience. Certainly, I'm not the only one who's had that experience, and in fact, lots of people have. An enormous number of people have had it. So if you've had that experience, you're not alone, which is a good thing. And perhaps an even better thing is that there are not only people who are looking for a more meaningful life, but there are people who found it. And I'm not necessarily just talking about Buddhists either. There's quite a large undercurrent in society of people who are pursuing the spiritual path and pursuing it very successfully, but we just don't tend to hear about it very much. I think that's very interesting. It says a lot about society. I suppose one of the things I realised when I started coming into contact with other people who were practising, particularly meditation, but also practising in a Buddhist sense, is that it's just how it sort of greatly enhanced my own practice, my own sort of personal practice, if you like, became. I found that actually I was able to bounce ideas off of people, and I was able to receive support and give support to other people who were going through similar things to what I was. And one of the other things is that, particularly in a more established spiritual community, you find that there are people who've been doing these practices for decades, maybe. I've come across people who've been meditating for over 70 years. And it's just amazing to see what these people are like, and to say, wow, okay, this is the path that I'm on, and this is a possible fruit of that path. And one of the great things, particularly about the spiritual community that I'm involved in, the wider spiritual community I'm involved in, is that there's this very, there's sort of two dimensions to this friendship. So there's the sense of people who are striving together, people who are working together to develop these qualities, these positive qualities. But there's also a kind of vertical friendship as well, taking inspiration from and advice from people who've been there before. I find this tremendously inspiring, really encouraging. So these are the three principles which I think kind of underpin Buddhist practice. The three principles being, just to reiterate, that acting upon a particular intention has the effect of encouraging that this process can go on and on. And that friendship is the context for this. That it's in amongst other practitioners that this process really takes off. So I think that's all I'll say for the time being. I've outlined a little bit about what Buddhism is, a little bit about how it relates to religion and philosophy, and I'll take another pause for a minute and then open up to questions. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
I don't promise to be able to answer all the questions, but I'll give them a go.
I've got a question. You didn't mention once nirvana. As I understand Buddha's teaching is that's the whole object, is to get there, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
As a Buddhist but not a monk, what do you think will happen to you after you die then?
Okay, so there's a lot of different questions in there, aren't there? There's a question of nirvana, there's a question of life after death, there's a question of what it means to be a practitioner but not a monk. So shall I take them in any particular order? Yeah. Okay, so I did mention awakening. I mentioned the Buddha in the sense of an awakened mind. So nirvana means literally something like the exhaustion. It's a metaphor. It means the blowing out, or blowing out. And this is a really interesting and curious feature of the Buddha's teaching, is that he almost always uses metaphor. I think Professor Richard Gombrich is a Buddhist scholar, says you can almost always tell what is a genuinely Buddhist teaching by the use of metaphor. If something is presented literally, it's almost always not directly from the Buddha, something like that. So what's this metaphor getting at? Well, nirvana, it's the blowing out of the flames of greed, hatred, and delusion. So it's not just the extinguishment altogether of oneself, or the extinguishing of oneself altogether, but it's the overcoming of greed, hatred, and delusion through the development of their opposites of generosity, love, awareness. So, I mean, in a sense, I haven't spoken about nirvana or even awakening for a very good reason, because it's in a sense it's the goal. You're right, but it's quite difficult to talk about. It's as though the regular conceptions that we have don't nicely fit on it in any way. This is why the Buddha uses metaphor, basically. So he talks about it in terms of nirvana as being a sort of spontaneous, skillful activity. And I think I prefer to think about it as that rather than a particular state, particularly a sort of spatial state somewhere else that one gets into. Does that clarify what nirvana is, or in terms of what I've said so far?
It's not what I read, but fine.
Okay,
that's your answer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't profess to be an expert on nirvana, but that's my understanding. And probably more could be said as well. What was the second question? It was in terms of after death, post-death. Do you want to go down that line?
Well, because it seems that the path for a Buddhist monk is quite different to, for example, what your path might be.
Yes, okay, so one of the characteristics of monasticism for the Buddhist is the taking on of a rather large number of precepts, so training principles. I think the number varies, but it's normally over 200 in traditional, particularly in the Theravada, in the School of the Elders. And this is a tradition which has come down from the Buddha. But there's also a sense in which a lot of these precepts are related to elements of life in ancient India, which are, in a sense, no longer relevant to us. Things like the handling of money. A monk should not handle money, according to the rules of the monasticism. But it's extremely difficult not to handle money in the world that we live in. And it's sort of question, so what is the principle which lies behind that precept? And one of the things that in my own tradition, we tend to, well, what we have done, and my teacher has done, is to go back and say, well, what are the principles which underlie all of these precepts that the monks take on? And my teacher has put it actually into a very canonical form. He's found a canonical form, so a form that's in the scriptures, which is nevertheless sort of a spiritual path. It's a spiritual path which is in line with the Buddha's teaching, but is a sort of foundational set of precepts rather than a kind of smorgasbord of all sorts of do's and don'ts. I could talk a little bit more about what those precepts are, if you like, but I think the general gist of the difference between, say, a practitioner such as myself and a monk, well, actually, I've got to be quite careful here. So the fundamental point I think for any Buddhist is about commitment to practice. It's about committing, in traditional Buddhism it seems committing to the Buddha, the Dharma, so his teaching, and to the Sangha, so the community of people who are following the path. And that can manifest in different ways. Now, there's a particular, lots of different schools of Buddhism which follow that out along the lines prescribed by precepts. But there are also forms of Buddhism which do so with a much smaller number of precepts, but with the same aim. And really what matters from the point of view of a Buddhist is one's commitment to practice and taking a view of practice which is appropriate to one's circumstances as well. I was quite long-winded. I'm not necessarily sure I got there in the end, but what do you think?
You've spoken about it as though it's to do with this life.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that as a Buddhist you will believe in reincarnation, at least unless you're fortunate enough to be a monk and get to nirvana. I may be using terminology that's not precise.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
But is that not a key issue for you, to make sure that this life leads to a better one next time? And what does that actually mean?
Yeah. Well, okay. So there's an issue here of reincarnation, which is a thorny one in itself. I would prefer not to use the word reincarnation because it suggests that there is some unchanging essence which is put into a new body each time, which is contrary to Buddhist teaching. So the Buddha teaches instead conditioned arising. So the metaphor he uses is of a candle lighting another candle, and that candle lighting another candle. So it's a question, is it the same flame? Is it a different flame? Well, yes and no. You can't really say it's the same person next time. But I think from the point of view of a practitioner, really all that matters is this present life. What happens afterwards? Well, okay, it will sort itself out, providing in this life we act in a skillful way. In a sense, that's what matters. So it's about setting up conditions so that whatever the post-death state is, and whoever it is that inherits my actions, that they are sort of conducive to awakening further down the line, or nearer down the line, if possible. But I think it's important to recognise that monasticism isn't the only way towards enlightenment. And I know quite a large number, as I say, of very experienced Buddhist practitioners who are quite some way there, in my opinion, who have never been monks and never intend to be. So it's more about to what extent am I using the conditions around me as best I can to practice, to commit to a spiritual life, and that sees itself panning out in all sorts of different ways. Anything else on that?
I better be quiet for a minute.
Okay.
Somebody else on the go.
Yeah, okay. Yes?
Thank you very much for the talk, and actually I have a couple of questions, but I will ask you.
All right, go on.
Do Buddhists believe in God, the creator of heavens and earth?
So, in the sense of a creator of heaven and earth, no.
And when they don't believe in God, the creator, how could they have that goal? I mean, you know, when you meditate and you do all the rituals, for example, on this earth, helping other people and making friendships, what's the purpose of that? from the Buddhist text.
Yeah, so this sort of links in with my second point, really, that from the Buddhist point of view, the human being, in a sense, is capable of, well, it has limitless potential. The human being, from a Buddhist point of view, can be the highest in the universe. So this is in a sense an answer to your question. In practicing, the reason why one practices, the reason why one meditates, is to be on that path towards a state of spontaneous compassion, spontaneous wisdom. So it's saying that the highest thing that one can become is an enlightened being, and that one can become that in a human body. So does that answer your question?
Yes. And so would you consider Buddhists as atheists?
Well, that's an interesting question in itself.
I mean, would you consider yourself as an atheist? I can ask that maybe.
Yeah, you can ask me that. Yeah, I prefer not to sort of go down that line at all in terms of theist or atheist. I mean, one of the things. So talking about, say, the creation of the universe. This is traditionally one of 14 unanswered questions that the Buddha gets posed. So one of them is, does the universe have a beginning? And the Buddha refuses to answer this question. And the reason why he refuses to answer it is, well, I'm not sure whether it's he doesn't know the answer. I think, firstly, he disagrees with the terms of the question. So a beginning to a universe, in a sense, it doesn't make sense. A beginning only makes sense in terms of time, and time only makes sense in terms of a universe. So you could say on a philosophical point of view, there's a difficulty there. But I think that the primary reason, really, and the sort of more spiritual reason, is that it's completely irrelevant to one's ability to practice generosity, one's ability to meditate, one's ability to study, one's ability to look clearly at the way things are. Something which happened a long time ago doesn't necessarily, of that order, doesn't necessarily have any bearing on the spiritual practice that I'm taking part in now. And it may even be a distraction from it. I think that's what the Buddha would say.
Any more questions or observations? Yes, Chris.
Hi, you've used the term spiritual quite a lot this evening. And I know in the academy there's quite a lot of awareness raising and being clear on certain concepts. So I'd just like to ask you, could you perhaps expand and elucidate exactly what you mean by spiritual?
Maybe not exactly, but I can point in a direction. Yeah, absolutely.
The best.
Yeah. I appreciate the question. Thank you for the opportunity to clarify. Yeah. So it has two potential meanings. So one is in the sense of being ethical. So in the sense of acting on the basis of, say, kindness, generosity, contentment, truthfulness, that sort of thing. So in a sense, that's a kind of mundane notion of spiritual. It's about actions which make things easier for myself and for others, which are helpful to myself and to others in embarking upon things like meditation. So that's one definition of spiritual. Another definition is a sense of something higher, a sense of something transcending our ordinary experience. And on that, I can't necessarily talk all that much, but it's that sort of direction, the direction towards something higher, which is the other quality, the other aspect of spiritual. Yeah. Is that? Yeah.
Fine, great, thank you.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Gabrielle, this is Z, and we practice Nichiren Buddhism.
Okay.
I don't know if you heard of it.
I have heard of Nichiren Buddhism, yes.
Yeah. So just for everyone else, Nichiren Buddhism was founded on the teachings of a 13th century monk called Nichiren. And at the time in Japan, in the 13th century, there was a lot of poverty, a lot of war, a lot of destruction, there was just a lot of unhappiness, basically. So this ordinary man called Nichiren became a monk when he was 11, studied all the different sutras, all the different doctrines,
discourses
of Shahriar Buddha, and he came across the Lotus Sutra, which was the last discourse that Buddha taught in the last 8 years of his life. And the Lotus Sutra teaches that every being, every human being, every individual has Buddhahood.
Mm-hmm.
Buddhahood basically means absolute freedom and completeness, and it's characterized by wisdom, compassion, courage, and life force. And on a deep level, it teaches the mystic law, which is the universal law of life. So it's the idea that every individual is connected, and by transforming your own karma, your own suffering, your own obstacles, by overcoming every obstacle you face, it can have effect on you and your environment. And to bring that to now, we're members of an organisation called Shahriar International, SGI UK we're members of, which is basically a global network of 193 countries of literate Buddhists who practice. So the 3 principles of practicing literate Buddhism within SGI is faith, practice and study. And so I can relate to what you were saying about faith, that it's not blind faith, and it's fundamental to practice this Buddhism. Faith in yourself and faith in others, and faith that you actually have Buddhahood, whether you're a practicing Buddhist or not. Practice, we don't meditate, we chant the name of the Lotus Sutra, which is Nam-myoho-renge-kyo, and we chant this twice a day, along with chapters of the Lotus Sutra. And Nichiren Daishonin basically taught that by chanting Nam-myoho-renge-kyo every day, you connect with the mystic law, this universal law of life. Your life is in rhythm. So with the first principle you mentioned, by acting upon an impulse or determination to really transform something in your life, something that's making you sad or something deep, you can make it happen. So by taking that first step and acting upon your Buddhahood, you will achieve what you want to achieve. And study, so we study the writings of Nichiren Daishonin, the 13th century monk, and also the Lotus Sutra, and also writings of the SGI president, Daisaku Ikeda, who you may have heard of, he's a philosopher who writes on peace. Sorry, I've gone on a little bit. So basically,
sorry, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but after that we are going to the Student Union Hall. There are drinks there. We can have a we can have a chat there. We can continue. I'm very interested to listen to what you're saying.
Maybe this lady could give a talk.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking of that. Yeah.
No, I wasn't being funny. I mean it. It's interesting.
Yeah.
So that's fine. I mean, yeah. So
Can I just ask
do you want to?
questions?
Yes, sure. Yes, please.
Okay. So, what are your ideas on world peace, or as we call it, kosarufu in Japanese? And what is there a particular form of Buddhism you practice?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer the second question first. So I'm part of the True Ratna Buddhist community. So True Ratna meaning 3 jewels. Yeah, so going back to Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. My ideas on world peace, I don't really have an off-the-peg answer, I'm afraid. Yeah, maybe we'll talk about that afterwards.
Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah. I was going to say, do you think it's fundamental to change your fundamental nature, so who you actually are, core of you, or is it just your practice?
I think it has changed me on a fundamental level. Yeah, on almost every level, particularly in things like fearlessness, developing a quality of fearlessness. I wouldn't have been able to do this 5 years ago. No question. I would have been shivering outside somewhere. Things like so now I practice meditation daily. I really love my meditation practice. I love that element of connecting with positive emotion, connecting with yes, of more subtle, more refined qualities of my experience. And I'm not sure that was there before. I think that's something I have fundamentally developed, and it's quite a core part of who I am now. One of the things I should say is that I'm becoming ordained next year, not as a monk in a non-monastic order. And one of the things that I've been doing in preparation for that is, it's sort of developing my commitment to my practice and to my friendships with other people in the order. And certainly I can see that how my relationships with sort of pre-Buddhist friends have matured as a result of that. Maybe in a way which they wouldn't have done had I not been engaging in my Buddhist practice. But also, developing friendships with, in a sense, much deeper friendships as well with people who are also practicing. It's kind of difficult to quantify, actually, from the inside. It's like staring at something very close up. One thing I do like to occasionally do, I've kept a journal since I was in my mid-teens. One thing I do like to do is kind of occasionally read back and look at what I thought about these things, these general topics, age 16 or whatever. It's incredibly salutary. It just really makes me think just how far I've come in the course of doing this. Not necessarily that my views have changed, but they've definitely been refined, definitely matured. They've definitely become more nuanced as well. So I'm confident that in this 10 years or so more that I've been practicing, it has made a pretty fundamental difference to me. I think the people who know me well, my family in particular, have noticed that. For instance, I was saying to Shahriar earlier on, my family are all practicing Christians, to a man. They're all practicing Christians. But some of them have recently taken on meditation. My parents have started meditating. Now, I never suggested this to them, but I think they've seen aspects in my own development which made them think maybe this is a good thing. So I suspect that it's not just from the inside that I notice there's a change.
Any more questions? So may I ask the final question? Because you said you have a Christian family, and yourself, I think you have a Christian background.
That's right. Yeah.
So what are the similarities, for example, the Buddha's teachings with the Christian teaching, apart from meditation and reincarnation? But in terms of the ethical and moral issues in the society.
I have to admit, my knowledge of Christianity is rather rusty now. I don't think I can give all that good an answer.
But you were a member of Church of England.
I was a member of the Church of England, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's probably safer to say, well, why did I leave the Church of England? What was I missing?
Well, if you would like to.
I think that's sort of a better ground, because I'll say that, and maybe the answer to your question will emerge. I think one of the things I realised, particularly when I started meditating, as I mentioned, was that there wasn't really anyone else that I could connect with in my church, actually, and people who are my seniors. I didn't necessarily feel my spiritual seniors. I really did look around, particularly when I was at university. I really did look around for mentors within the Church of England to support me in what was my nascent ethical and meditative practice, and I didn't find any. And I came across Buddhism, and suddenly there were loads of individuals who were speaking the same language as me and who were able to help me. I think that, what can I say? It's a difficult one, because I think there's a danger of me ending up being rather critical towards Christianity. I'm not sure I'm going to do that. In sort of saying what the comparisons are. Maybe I'll have to think about that. I'll get back to you.
Thank you very much. And yes, I would like to ask you, all of you guys, please come to the Students' Union, because it's very important, to get to know each other. There are, complimentary wine and refreshments. I don't know, orange juice or apple juice. So please do come if you have even a couple of minutes. Thank you very much, Tim.